Hmm. All right. We are live. Thank you all so much for joining this morning. We were just commenting Hunter's coming in from Amsterdam, so we're all over the place. Um, yeah, I mostly wanted to convene us because I feel like every one of you is doing really fascinating work with machine learning, and I feel like you all probably have a lot of thoughts for each other, and I know some of you are attending each other's talks and stuff, so I just kind of wanted to give us a chance to chat. Um, yeah, and so I don't have, like I said, I don't really have a lot of like structure in mind, but I just like maybe to kick us off, I can just throw out the question like, what did you all find inspiring in each other's talks if you had a chance to watch? And what kind of like ideas do you have for next projects for machine learning, like given all that?
I can start. I was so the one talk I actually didn't get to go to because I was traveling was to Hunters, but I got the chance to like look at that to see it to look at the stream a couple of days ago. And I just want to say I really like your instrument and I really like how it's laid out and how it's all kind of accessible and affordable and yeah, you just have like very easy ways to just hop between like very different sorts of behaviors and textures and sounds. Um, and yeah, I really liked how ML fit into all of that too. But yeah, it just made me do some thinking of the instruments that I use in my own improvisations and how yeah, how ML could be like sort of like a small piece of this bigger thing that yeah, it's like so many things are kind of affordable to do in the moment when you're improvising. Super cool.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I'd say for me, I found it really inspiring to hear everyone's different reasonings or like motivations for choosing to work with machine learning tools in the first place. I think it's such like it's pretty I feel like there's a lot of like kind of uh I think in like kind of just general society, people kind of like associate it with one sort of aesthetic or one sort of kind of like way of thinking about art. And I think it's super inspiring when everyone has like a very specific kind of different way that they want to approach it and implement it in a way that's serving like an artistic function rather than something that's like purely technical or something like that. So like from everybody's talk, I thought it was really amazing how different everybody's kind of motivations and goals were with it, and being able to kind of even use the same sort of tools for like completely different means.
Yeah, I definitely felt the same way for the talks I attended as well as the streams that I watch. It's kind of like if you start from the performance at the end, right? Like it's totally different and it's distinct to each of our unique artistic practices. And if you start tracing back, like what are the kernels of machine learning and what is that facilitating in like each of those works, it's totally different. And it's always in service of like our distinct visions, rather than, as Hunter mentioned, this sort of like very kind of recognizable kind of quote unquote ML aesthetic maybe. And I think that was really cool. And I think the audience really loved that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think in a way,
no, go
sorry,
for it.
good. Oh, I was gonna say, in a way, I think having that demonstrated to everybody, like, I think makes it seem way more like accessible and easy to use. I feel like when you like mention AI or machine learning to somebody who's like just starting out with producing electronic music or learning an instrument or something, it seems like this very daunting thing. But it's like I think it makes it much clearer, kind of like what you were saying, that like it's much easier to pick up and implement in various ways as long as you have like an aesthetic or an artistic goal in mind. It's just a tool that's serving that, just like any other tool.
Yeah, that kind of, since you both brought up the idea of like sort of there's like, I believe Hunter, you brought up the idea that there's sort of like a commonly expected AI aesthetic. Is there such thing as AI aesthetics? What does that look like? What is that? Or like, what do people expect it to be? What do you think it is? Yeah.
I feel like it might be more recognizable in like visual media than sound, but I think, people tend to think of either the like early deep stream experiments or the sort of like very kind of sanitized, polished kind of like DALL-E Midjourney kind of look. But even then, I think there's a common sort of like AI glitch aesthetic that has emerged, right? And that's maybe a little bit more interesting, but I think it's also like kind of common. So I think like the more we can break out of these sort of like default categories and sort of like poke things in different and new directions based on like everyone's unique background, the more interesting it is to me.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Welcome, Julie. Just want to pop in, say welcome. Thanks for joining. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that's like, I'm curious how you all feel. And I know, Alice, you talked about getting a little spicy about some uses of AI or some thoughts about AI that people have, like how you all feel your work relates to like current, like there's so many conversations about AI and art. And I know just this week, like here at Michigan, someone from the theater department got in touch with me. They were hosting a student discussion around AI art, and she was like, you can come, the pitchforks are going to be out. Everyone is like really upset. So I'm curious if you like how you all feel you relate to those conversations with like your work being sort of interdisciplinary, like multidisciplinary and sort of not fitting that mold.
Can I ask, do you know what the pitchforks are about? I'm curious, like in a theater context, what the use of AI is looking like.
Well, I think it was part of the pitchfork aspect was related to the strikes, the writer and actor strikes. And tied into that, I guess the spark was that there was a student production and they used DALL-E to generate the image for the poster. And that was the sort of, yeah, spark.
Yeah, I guess my take on it is, I think there is definitely a temptation these days to use AI, whether or not it's warranted. And that applies both in the arts as well as like everywhere else in industry. Like sometimes all you need is a linear regression, but people want to throw like the most advanced, most like sexy model at a problem, right? And I think like it does come down to it's a tool like anything else, and like does it accomplish something unique that you can't otherwise, and is the use of that tool in that setting ethical as you would judge it with any other tool, right? So like in the writer strike example, like no, people shouldn't use AI to cross the picket line. It's unethical just as it would be for like a human to take that job on while a strike is happening. But I do think that like because everyone is trying to make sense of this technology, there are a lot of kind of unnecessary or like overdone or unethical use cases floating around. And there's like a need for nuance that hasn't quite emerged yet, right? And so I think it's very understandable that for a lot of people, you have to end up taking kind of a binary position. It's like, I'm in favor of this or I'm not in favor of this. When my take is like, there are a lot of unethical deployments of AI, and there are some instances in which it might let you accomplish things that you can't otherwise. But you have to take that like critical lens and make that judgment just as you would with any other decision in your process.
Yeah, I feel like we're uh or yeah, I feel like there's something like what Alice said, there's definitely something where we should always be concerned with like, how the tools that we're using were made and be critical about the context in which we're using them. Um, so yeah, I think it's definitely a lot of uh thought that needs to be given to this and hopefully with time yeah, everybody sort of begins to be conscious and nuanced about this sort of issue.
Yeah, I think as artists, we're in a super unique position of being able to kind of like bring awareness or bring kind of a criticality to these tools. I feel like if you think about like the history of producing electronic music or audio technology or whatever, there's always instances of people being critical of technology and misusing it or kind of reclaiming it as like something else than it's intended for. I think that's a really exciting kind of way of approaching it for me that I'm kind of wanting to get more involved with as I continue to work with these tools is like what are ways that I can think about using them that are like subverting their normative applications like in the world, and like what does that mean, and like how can that maybe kind of bring some kind of I don't know, attention to like how these tools are used in ways that maybe like some people aren't necessarily um that like some people maybe don't understand on like a technical level or something like that.
I'm curious, like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Julie.
Go ahead. I can consolidate all the thoughts. So
Feel free. No, if you have thoughts to consolidate, do it.
well, first of all, Molly, I recommended you to go speak at a donor event in LA for Michigan because they think AI is like the end all be all, the way Michigan's gonna pull ahead from every other university. And for their donors, they want not just in like AI in health or in, electrical engineering, but in computer science, but also the arts perspective. So they contacted a musicology professor and then who referred me, then I couldn't do it. And then I referred Molly. It's just so funny. It's like we get put in these positions of because we're doing something to do with AI, of being that voice for the arts. And at least for me, I don't know about you all, I feel pretty uncomfortable doing that because I don't feel like I know that much about AI. And meanwhile, because I'm being placed in these positions, I kind of want to be able to say something like to help change the sort of dialogue. And so I've been reading a lot um, and just trying to figure it out. Um,
Yes, and it's interesting. Since we brought up like the whole academic setting, I know all of us have worked in academic settings, are working in academic settings, and that creates its own tension because a lot of the people interfacing with these technologies aren't in academic settings. But like the difference between how arts departments and like professors relate to the potential in AI versus like people in computer science. And Ugo, I'd be curious to hear your perspective as someone who is active in computer science research. Like I was speaking like the other day with an electrical engineering professor I'm currently studying with. And I was like, yeah, there's this whole thing with this theater department, and like there's people angry about AI and that it would be used at all in the arts. And he was just like, really? Because in electrical engineering, literally everyone wants to use AI for everything, which is something you alluded to, Alice. So like, yeah, I'd be curious, Ugo, as someone who's in CS, like how the whole AI arts thing is perceived there.
There is so much hype. Yeah, there is so much hype, and I would say, yeah, just to put it I guess kind of succinctly, there is kind of a misunderstanding of why we are making art, I think. And yeah, there's a lot of focus on product and how we get it to look and kind of like imitating artists and interpolating between styles and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of where the conversation stops. And yeah, kind of what or the thing that I would like love to see in the computer science departments and like people in computer science, you know, specializing in computer science, but like wanting to work on tools for creative people is to have a creative practice themselves, which surprisingly, like a lot of the folks don't that I see in like computer science departments working on like, uh, AI music and AI art and stuff like that. Uh, yeah, so yeah, it's kind of like a thing. Like I wish I would see more people kind of like actively like pursuing a creative practice with the tool that they're developing to get an understanding. Because otherwise you leave that stuff for the experimentation part where you like, you run some user study that, depending on how you set it up, it may or may not show that something is useful in an artistic context. But even then, those metrics are kind of like flawed or, like don't really tell the full extent of the story. Um, so yeah, yeah, this is just kind of like a misunderstanding of like what we're getting out of our artistic practices and why we're doing it and who even like it's for and what it's telling. That I wish, would change. And I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to like get closer to arts departments as I like look for a more permanent job. So yeah.
What do you think,
Yeah,
like, oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I totally agree because the norm in academia, especially computer science, is if you're going to publish a paper, essentially you're proving that you're making some contribution to the field, right? And the structure with which you normally do that is, here's the field that I'm operating in, here are the standard canonical benchmarks for this particular problem, and I'm going to show that my new model, my new method, whatever, my new contribution beats the state of the art by like, some amount, right? And to quantify how well your approach is doing, that necessarily implies a notion of correctness, right? So in, things like text generation or classification, there's like straightforward accuracy, whatever metrics that you can use. And something like art, you still have to, it's obviously we're not making art because we want art to be quote unquote correct. We make art for all kinds of reasons, and correctness is not really a factor, right? And so how do you distill that into like a metric that somebody in a research lab can then publish a paper around and get it accepted by a journal? It's a very different paradigm. And so like, I think, yeah, the research in academia can only take us so far in terms of these are things that work for these things, but then artists have to then take it one step further in terms of like, what is aesthetically, intellectually interesting about these tools?
Yeah, the other thing I'd say it's like kind of uh at least now it's starting to get some traction. Now that the sort of like a bit more people are starting to like get tired of the text to media wave. It's like there was kind of like like ever since like generative modeling got like good enough to like start being like super realistic. There was kind of like nobody was really paying attention to the interface part of this, and it was all kind of like, yeah, let's just get this metric, the thing that Alice was saying about like publishing papers, let's just get this reconstruction quality up, let's make it look more realistic, let's make it more realistic, and you pour millions of dollars into research across the industry into making the images look more realistic. And then 4 years later or 5 years later or whatever, we have like deceivingly photorealistic images. But the control is still like this like 70s style like terminal where you like type some sentence and like hope 70% of that sentence is going to be reflected on the image. And yeah, it's crazy that in like such a short amount of time we got from like you know, 128 pixel images to like full scale resolution, like realistic stuff. It shows like really the power of like, you know, um, science and research and all that stuff. And yeah, if only we could have a little bit of focus on how we're controlling that and how we're using, you know, how we're like mapping our intention and our gesture into these really powerful systems. And again, I feel like that would also come from, you know, an interest in being engaged in the artistic practice, um, from the perspective of the people who are working on the problems.
I'm curious, since we've been talking about how artists have, you know, kind of a unique positioning regarding these technologies and how we want, you know, engineers to maybe develop a creative, like, I'm curious what you would all see as an ideal sort of structure for making art with like, is it the individual artist who learns the machine learning tools and comes up with the concepts? Is it collaborative where you have engineers and artists working together? Is it like, Alice, you mentioned maybe academia is not the place for this? Like what is the structure of a really fruitful like arts and machine learning research look like, I guess?
Yeah, I guess I would say whatever you can manage. I don't know. It seems like to become very fluent in machine learning and to be, you know, a very kind of skillful artist, like these are two very substantial skill sets, right? So it's like if you can swing both, that's great. But I also don't think it's realistic to assume that every artist who wants to work with machine learning should go get like a PhD in machine learning either. So I think like maybe having more avenues for fruitful collaboration, as you mentioned, and then also for people from both parties to almost come up with like a common language or a common framework with which to discuss the points of connection and collaboration. That's probably the way to go. And also to Ugo's point, having the machine learning tools in and of themselves be more both user-friendly as well as extensible as well as controllable in ways that fit the inputs that artists want to be able to control, to have interfaces that map to the knobs that fit artistic practices. I think there's probably actually even in academia some really fruitful collaborations that can happen between like, I don't know, like human computer interaction departments and CS departments and artists to kind of like really think about how do you make that tooling actually interactive and useful and germane.
There's actually this lab in, I think it's Iceland. It's called the Intelligent Instruments Lab, and they've started to do stuff just like that, where they'll have artists in residency and a team of researchers with experience in human computer interaction and machine learning. And yeah, they sort of have been trying this iterative design process for musical instruments powered by machine learning. I'm gonna try to share this link with y'all so that if you're interested, checking their work out.
Cool, thanks. I'll post that up. I'm gonna plan to go back through all of your presentations and find all of the artists you mentioned and like put them all up on the website because I think it'd be cool to have that as a resource. So I'll definitely throw this on in. Yeah, Julie, you've done work with, like, you're working with a team right now, right, on a machine learning so like, how have you found that collaboration process to be?
It's really awesome. And it might have to do with the people involved. Like, and so it's really a relatively small team. It's a master's student, Irfan, and an undergrad student, and they're much more familiar with uh like machine learning than I am. But it is funny, like um it seems like I'm older and somehow there's just some like judgment calls that I'm able to make that I think it just, even if I don't understand the technology as well as they do, it's somehow the artistic direction is I was very insecure about it, but it turns out that the artistic direction is just as, if not more important than like the tool that you use. Because there are just so many tools out there, and being able to decide, like, this is finally I've realized like what PIs do. You know, I was like, there's just lazy bums who like let everyone else do their work, except actually there's something involved. Um, but it's a little bit different also because we are exploring all together, and as a team, I think it's just really amazing. I feel like as an artist, when I've done machine learning or AI in my own work by myself, it's felt a little bit lonely and daunting. Like you just have to sit at your computer figuring it out. Um, which is fine, you know, like everyone has to do it, but in a team, it's awesome. Like you meet every week and you know, you share or like you something that you don't understand and that maybe someone else can explain to you. I feel like more opportunities for people to work as a team. I recommend it at least.
Cool. Hunter, you have worked with in developing the machine learning aspects of your instrument. You've worked with a toolkit that was developed by a team, right? And have you interfaced with the team at all, or have you mostly been taking their tools and kind of implementing it on your own? And like, how has it been working with and like customizing a tool that was started by somebody else?
So with the Fluke Homa project, I was when I started at the University of Chicago doing my PhD, I was working with Sam Pluta, who had just started an artist in residency program there during his sabbatical. And that also happened to take place right during the COVID lockdowns. So that team at Huddersfield University started to have these plenary sessions on Zoom where they would like give talks. And we would have like virtual workshops sessions with the people on the team and whoever was interested. Like it was like in the very early beta testings of the software package. I like was really involved with those and like was going there just to like learn and like figure out a way to work with it. And I feel like what that gave me is like, you know, I'm not a computer scientist. I code, but I wouldn't consider myself. I don't understand the math and all the technical aspects of the machine learning stuff. But what the sessions did give me is kind of like an intuition of what they do. It's like when you first start working, you know, like in with a DAW, it's like you start to understand like, oh, I know if I apply this compressor to this kind of sound source, I'm going to get this kind of result. And as I started to kind of like have these sessions where I was being guided by these people who are experts, I started to build kind of like a musical intuition for using the tools, just like I would with any other kind of electronic music tool. So yeah, I thought it was super helpful, and they have a lot of great documentation on their website that I've found to be really geared towards like musicians and less technical. So I mean, even now when I'm still working with that software package, I am always on the website, like looking through the forum and seeing what other people are doing, and yeah, just trying to build like a musical intuition with the tools.
I guess sort of tangential to that, sort of on that note, like what would it look like? What does it look like, do you all think, for artists to like, that's actually a really cool trajectory that you just described of like, you were interested in using these Fluke Homa tools. You were like, I'm going to show up at these sessions to talk to, like, hear what's going on, talk to everyone, start like asking questions, all that. Like, what do you think it looks like for an artist who's interested in starting their very first, like never used machine learning before? Like, what does it look like for an artist to start using machine learning in their work if they have an idea and they're starting from zero? Like, I'm curious your all's ideas, partly because like one of my goals in creating Chicago Creative Machines and building out this website, which I'm going to continue to do over the summer, is like to grab some resources people could use if they wanted to get started. But I'm like, you know, each of us has such a unique place that we started in learning this stuff that I'm curious if you all have ideas for like where would an artist start? Like how would they get started?
Well, for me, actually, how I got started using machine learning was in my master's program in electronic music, where I wanted to do a project and I had no idea how to do it. didn't even think about machine learning at all. And I talked to my advisor and he was like, you need to use machine learning for this. And I was like, oh, like where to even begin? And he just gave me like a bunch of examples of like art that's already been made using machine learning. And that kind of, I think like seeing like actual like artistic works that use it and maybe even kind of having some kind of explanation of why someone would choose to use machine learning with those artistic projects was really helpful to me, kind of going from like zero to having some kind of basic understanding of why I needed to use such a tool in my music.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like we might be starting to get to the point where we can sort of teach machine learning for art in the context of other people that have done used machine learning in their art. And then yeah, probably um based on the techniques and other things that people have done, dive into topics, more technical topics from there.
I think for me, the like one step even before that is having some sort of flow chart about like what exactly is it that I want to do, and does it actually require machine learning or not? And I think like if we can set out some sort of taxonomy to help guide people, because like people have all these misconceptions about what these models are capable of or not, right? And it would really suck if you had no background in this and you invested a ton of time and then you eventually found out that machine learning can't even do what you want to do. And that might still be a happy, accident. You might still learn things that way, but I think like the starting point is education around like when is it useful versus not. And then from there, I think it's either like if you don't already know how to code, you have to learn how to code. And then you can go on a Hugging Face and there are, like 5 million models you can choose from to do anything you want. Or if you don't know how to code or you don't want to, maybe that's fine too. And then how can you get in touch with engineers, scientists, researchers who are interested in similar things and who might be open to a collaboration. So it might be a knowledge thing. It might also be a coordination thing, but getting the problem crystal clear, I think, is the first step.
I wonder if there will ever be a point where you have like machine learning or just kind of like the idea of a learning agent kind of thing where you wouldn't have to learn how to code to and still like be able to flexibly use it in a system like that. Can't think of anything like that at the moment, but I think something like that would be kind of interesting. At least lower one of the technical barriers to getting started with the technology, because understanding it is one thing, and again, like yeah, like understanding for loops and while loops and code and vectors and all that might be another thing.
When
Yeah,
I first started working with machine learning, I was using this tool called Wekinator, which is like a GUI-based tool for just like training basic classification models. And I found it to
That's
be like super accessible to use.
that's actually an excellent example. I can't believe I forgot about Wekinator.
Yeah, that's a classic. I love, yeah, it's super easy to use.
you could even imagine, there's like programming assistants that exist today, right? With like chat interfaces like Copilot, and like having variants of that are more specifically focused on creative processes. So like in a chat setting, you could ask it, I want to do this, is this suitable for machine learning or not? But it could also generate code to get you started. That's a lot easier said than done. Like, I don't really think we're at a point where like the quality for these kinds of things can be taken for granted, especially for like large projects, like training a model and embedding it within your artistic process. But, the science is definitely moving in that direction, right? And so I wouldn't be surprised if, a couple years from now, like something like that could be built and could be specialized towards like a more creative domain like this.
Yeah, I actually, going back a beat to Wekinator, like what you described, yeah, Alice, is super compelling, and like it gives like I pause and I know that you know a lot about GitHub Copilot, but I like hesitate using that in my own coding because or at least I hesitate to recommend like a beginner use it, simply because like you're saying, like there's no guarantee of correctness of code. And like for someone who already knows how to code, they can look at that and be like, oh, I think that's wrong, but like a beginner wouldn't know where to start. So, but going back to Wekinator, I actually know someone who I am going to try to loop into some future like conversations named Corey Tripathy, who teaches at a university here in Michigan. And he was hired to do like a machine learning and music like position. That's like what he teaches, private lessons. Only like he found Wekinator to be so useful for like so many projects that effectively he only teaches Wekinator now. Like that's his job full time, is like, how could we use Wekinator to make a cool thing? And like there's enough cool things to make with it that like he doesn't really need to resort to other tools very much. So yeah, it seems like a powerful thing. I want to check it out sometime.
Yeah, big shout out to Wikinator.
Yeah, ahead of its time.
I'm curious now, if you all would each want to talk about like how, like what ideas you have for like next machine learning creative projects.
I can go first. I talked a little bit about this at the end of my session. I think for me, it's always like whatever you did last year is not interesting anymore, right? It's like whatever you're going to do next is more interesting. And for me, I'm really interested in kind of like taking logic that exists today in the world already, like, you know, the way that we interact with algorithms on our phones, or the way that like e-commerce will serve recommendations based on like invisible interactions that we're, you know, that are being tracked, right? Just as we're like clicking around the internet, and kind of like encoding that in sort of an autonomous system. So having primarily installations where it's kind of like you take a couple of algorithms and you put them against each other in sort of an adversarial fashion, and you project this logic in like visual media. So what does it look like if, you know, two algorithms are competing for your attention? What does it look like if algorithms are like surveilling you in real time with your consent in this room, and then like producing images that reflect what they think you are most attracted to based on what they're observing. So not really with the goal of like anything necessarily being beautiful per se, that's not the point, right? But like more of, if you let these systems run autonomously, like what kind of fucked up shit do you get out of it? And what does that imply for equivalent systems that we're all interacting with on a daily basis?
It's cool pushing something that we already experience into our awareness in an intense way. That's cool.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this too, where I'm really interested in kind of somehow, and like I'm not a computer scientist, so I don't really know even if this is possible. I'm just gonna try it and see see what happens. But I'm really like interested in training like generative models on like bad like audio feature data. So, or like somehow, or some kind of audio features that like are kind of hard to like conceptualize as like a human listener. Like I'm really been interested in like audio codecs and like data reduction algorithms and stuff, and somehow being able to like create new ones, or like, I don't know, somehow like transfer like transforming audio using like audio features that like we can't really like wrap our ears around, because a lot of like data compression algorithms like use a lot of like perceptual audio coding and various ways of machine mediated listening that like have really specific kind of um like end goals, or kind of like aesthetics or ideals baked into them. And I would really like to find a way to create some sounds using the similar kind of principles, but like in like the wrong, like the most wrong way possible. That makes sense.
Nice. Yeah, I'm thinking about similar things, thinking about yeah, always working with generative sounds. But yeah, I'm kind of interested in, yeah, the idea of like inverting places of the embedding space that don't really exist in reality. So finding like weird points in the finding interesting points in the middle of like these hidden representations of neural nets, and then kind of using these points and then finding a way, kind of like an expressive way of controlling them in a way that they're kind of accessible and have different gestures affordable to me. So uh, kind of thinking of getting making an instrument a little bit more out of the generative model and less of a program. Yeah.
I yeah, I was just thinking, you know, so much of AI, right now we're talking about generative AI, but a lot of AI is also being used to choose things for us. Um, just thinking about Spotify and all of that. I really wish that there was a way in these platforms to be able to adjust your settings so that you could choose something that was wackier, you know? And like, and I th- and I think obviously all of you guys said stuff about like let's feed it, bad data. Let's look at the outliers. And I think a problem with generating so much is like something resonated with me, Ugo, in your talk about you're just like going through trash, like mounds of trash,
Yes.
and then you're choosing the stuff that's not trash, right? And that it would be cool if there was a way to already kind of say like this stuff, like obviously the human should because the artist should, but like in other cases where you could say like I want something that's not trying to like fit this model, but it's generated kind of like out there. It's not quite a fit. Um, and I think the artists that I have talked to, the musicians are really interested in AI. They they want this thing that they can just dump all of their recordings into a model and then they can just play with themselves. Except it's not actually that simple, right? And maybe helping musicians be able to figure that out, um, I think would be cool. And something that you mentioned about teaching, Molly, I just remembered that Teachable Machine, I like I showed it to like an elementary schooler, and it was like they knew how to use it, you know. It's like feels like it feels like a good starting point for people to understand like the very basics of like categorization.
Mhm. Yeah, that's uh that's cool. I think in my own work, I'm right now leaning more on like I sort of am following this thread you mentioned, you pointed out, Julie, of like feeding a network bad, like pointing out the sort of flaws. Feels like very like, I don't know, postmodern thing to do, but like um I'm like getting really interested in just simple classification networks. Like, you know, you play it a bunch of sounds and have it try to like design a network with an interesting confusion matrix that has interesting failure points, and then making a piece that's based on the failure points. Um, it's I'm getting more and more interested in very simple classification networks just because like you can do so much with them, and generating is awesome, but then like yeah, so is sort of the let's take input data and do like a simple transformation that also people listening or audience can understand what's going on. You can be like, here's the input, here's what it's doing with it, as a sort of entrance point to that world. Yeah. Uh I didn't really have any further like grand concluding thoughts, but I'm curious any final thoughts any of y'all have. I really appreciate hearing all your perspectives, and yeah, glad we all got a chance to talk. Thank you for making the time. Yeah, it would be cool to all collaborate or on something as well. But yeah, any final thoughts for each other on the presentations, on your work, on how we could make some cool stuff, break some stuff?
It's a cool format, the talk, Molly.
Mm.
You know, talk a little bit, play a little bit. Yeah, it's a really good one.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's great.
Yeah, it was so much fun to put together and to, yeah, just to experience.
Yeah, I know hearing all of your processes and then also seeing you is just like so inspiring to me. So yeah, thank you all. Like, and I got that feedback from audience as well. It's like, you know, I never thought, first of all, of this myself. And then now not only to see this cool thing, but to like hear exactly how it's made. It's just like, yeah, it's not a format that like, it's not a format that I think exists enough for artists, because it's like, we're all like, a lot of people who attend experimental art events are also artists. So it's like, we're all curious, right? We all want to know each other's stuff. So yeah. Well, thank you all so much. And yeah, thanks for participating in this series. There's gonna be more. And I hope you all are interested in potentially being involved in future efforts. I don't know exactly what they'll look like yet, but like I said, I'm gonna be going through this conversation, all of your presentations, and compiling the artists you mentioned, the pieces that you're working on, your own websites that you provided, and just like building out the Chicago Creative Machines website with a bunch of that stuff, like linking to Wekinator, linking to learning resources, all of that. So hopefully build out some resources for folks who just want to get more interested and involved. And if you all have anything in that vein you'd like me to include, please feel free to send it my way. Yeah, but thank you all so much. And yeah, hope to hear more soon.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks, everybody.
Molly.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.